Hello, this is Nick of Time. Thank you for joining us for this 10th talk in the series. Let me know if you have any problems with the switch to purple text. Someone had written in the comments that they were having trouble with the red colored text, so I've switched it. But if it causes others problems, we'll have to do something else. This first slide, we're going to review what we've been talking about recently, and then to wrap up and come to a conclusion on a main point, we'll jump forward to what we develop in terms of examining the empirical data, and then after that we will go back to the talking about the twin paradox while it's fresh in your mind to make a couple of other related points to what we've been talking about. But I didn't want this main point to get lost. Okay, interpreting special relativities, time dilation, as describing physical effects such as clock slowing, is invalidated by 3 levels of logic problems and contradictions. That's what we've just been talking about over the last several talks. Now, in addition, when we later look at the empirical data, we'll find that the GPS data is inconsistent with the interpretation of special relativity time dilation, causing clocks to slow down or accumulate proper time at a slower rate. Now, quickly make another point. So that leaves the other possible interpretation of time dilation. Namely, it's describing just observed effects. By just observed effects, means something like when you have 2 twins and they walk apart, each will observe the other twin to shrink, but there's no actual physical shrink going on for either twin. So that's what just observed means. An observed effect, but there's no physical effect associated with what's observed. Now, there are no logic problems with that interpretation of the meaning of special relativity's time dilation. But, once again, we'll find out that the GPS data is inconsistent with that interpretation as well. So there's no viable interpretation of special relativity's time dilation that matches the empirical data. It matches some of the empirical data, but the total empirical data. All right, now we'll go back to talking about some other related aspects of the twin paradox. Okay, a lot of physicists agreed with our conclusion that you can't explain a net difference in clock readings, proper time readings, when you have 2 twins starting together and one makes a round trip. So a number of relativists, having rejected the original claim, have tried 20 or more different reconciliation arguments with different causes, like length contraction or relative simultaneity, etc., or combinations thereof. But when they do that, that's an implicit rejection of Einstein's twin paradox claim about special relativity's time dilation causing clock slowing. But note that none of these different reconciliation arguments, which are by and large mutually exclusive to one another and contradictory to one another, is no explicit or official rejection of any of them. So any argument that seems to reconcile a problem with special relativity is accepted, not criticized. Well, legitimate arguments and concerns and questions about special relativity, there seems to be censorship, particularly in the last several decades, publishing those in the top tier physics journals. Well, we'll look at, we can't look at all 20 of those arguments and examine them. That would just be too long to be a waste of time anyway. But most of them fall into one of two categories. So we'll look at those categories of arguments and dispatch a whole bunch of them by looking at the problems with that category. So in this talk, we'll focus on turnaround acceleration as cause of the difference in clock readings that Einstein alleged, or what's implied by special relativity. Again, this whole category of argument concedes that Einstein's original claim that time dilation was the cause of the net proper time difference is invalid. In fact, Einstein himself in 1916 rejected his initial twin paradox claim and came up with a different argument, as did Max Born, and both of these were based on the turnaround acceleration. All right. The first problem with this whole category of arguments is if there's no clock rate difference during the constant velocity segments, then the so-called traveling twins clock must jump backward during the turnaround acceleration. In other words, let's say it's a very long round trip, 2 million years out and 2 million years back, and the slowing down factor is a half. That would mean the traveling twin, when he turned around, would have to lose 1 million years on his clock in, for example, just 2 days, if that's how long the turnaround acceleration took to go from V away from the stay-at-home twin to minus V, heading back towards the stay-at-home twin. Okay, let's look at other problems. Well, first, just to explain in a picture what that means, you have at the top of this picture the rocket going from event 1, which is the start, to event 2, which is the start of the turnaround, and that can be made arbitrarily long, like a couple million years. We're going from event 2 to event 3, from the start of the turnaround to the event, the end of the turnaround, that can be a couple of days. So that's very, very short. So here we have the rocket at event 1. It takes, let's say, 2 million years to travel that very long distance. And then during the turnaround, his clock will have to lose half of that time. He's going at 0.866 the speed of light. So that doesn't make much sense to have the clock jump backwards. Okay, the next general problem with this whole class of argument is that it requires two accelerations for the same parameters, the location where the acceleration takes place, the amount of acceleration going from v to minus v, or a total of 2v acceleration, and the duration of the acceleration. Having the same parameters for the location, acceleration, would have to cause effects that differ by orders of magnitude. So you have the same physics for those two accelerations, but they're supposed to cause effects that differ by orders of magnitude. For example, we'll have two twin paradox scenarios where the relative velocity is v for both of them, and the duration and location of the turnaround acceleration is the same for both of them. But the constant velocity duration of the trip is 100 times longer. And that, according to special relativity, would mean that, or at least Einstein's claim, would mean that the effect would be 100 times greater. It doesn't make sense for something that has the same parameters to cause 100 times a greater physical effect. You can do equations where you come out with the numbers, and the numbers come out, but the implied physical model of what you're doing just doesn't make sense, and here's one way to express that fact. And finally, we have a third problem with this whole class. And this is the empirical data. The data from all particle accelerators show that clock slowing is a function of velocity. And when you're accelerating, a function of instantaneous velocity. It is not a function of acceleration per se. Hence, trying to use acceleration as a cause for clock slowing has been shown to be invalid by the logic and by the data. Okay, that's another interesting exercise of showing how critical thinking can give a clearer picture of the validity and the problems with accepted arguments. And I'm just going to digress away from the physics to talk about critical thinking at the end of this talk here. I'm going to show 4 slides that were made by CNPS regarding their program on their campaign to restore critical thinking, and in this case, a subtopic to restore genius to human status. These were put together by David Hilstra of the CNPS. This one says, "Dear Albert, I know if you were alive, you would look at the challenges and problems with your theory and even consider that perhaps you were wrong." And in fact, as we talked earlier, I think like on the first slide, it showed that Einstein did this. In 1905, he came up with his twin paradox claim about time dilation causing slowing of clocks and round trip. He got some criticism and problems raised by others. He thought about it, and he came to the conclusion that they were right. He did some critical thinking on his own part, and he came up with a different solution. So we're not here to criticize Albert Einstein. He did a lot of excellent thinking. Admire him, respect him, and he did critical thinking on his own. Let me continue. Yet many physicists today cannot let go of thinking of Einstein as infallible, like the Pope speaking ex cathedra or something. They often forget that you, Einstein, were in fact a human, not a god. sometimes a picture like that picture on the right has a more memorable effect, stays in the mind longer, and this one says, Einstein is in fact a human and not a god, by Professor Dr. Cynthia Wick. Similar picture, great picture, I think David put this together, is Einstein as Jesus at the Last Supper, surrounded by the faces of a number of well-known physicists from different decades. It says, the moment we stop worshiping, start thinking critically, and question others' truths, is the moment science is free to move forward once again. Interesting thought, interesting picture. And here's David, he says, genius is an illusion. We need to start teaching critical thinking. Not about the stature of the person saying it, but the content of what's being said. And stop worshiping this illusion of genius, which keeps science from advancing. So, thank you very much for joining us again, and I hope that you can join us next time.